So welcome everybody to our second Authors in Conversation panel, now featuring all of our fabulous guests of honor. This was the only hour in the entire week where everyone was available because time's up. So on stage today we have Diane, Duane, Megan, Whalen, Turner, Kat Valente, Ursula, Vernon, C.V. Lee, and Jessica Day George. Is C.V. actually here? Did I see?
Just gonna say I don't see C.V. Lee.
Well, I hope she pops in at some point. She did. Maybe she's just running a little late. We're gonna get started anyway, and hopefully she will show up. Let's see. Okay. Well, that just threw me off my game there. Anyway, welcome to almost all of our fabulous guests of honor. Hopefully, we will see CV shortly. And if you enjoy this panel, don't forget, we will be in person next year, and you can find out more at register.crossingscon.org. So, without further ado, we have a lot of questions that have been submitted by our audience. So, I am going to push us along a little bit quicker than I think is probably normal for, we often do sort of a lackadaisical approach to time constraints at this convention. We do have a half an hour after this panel before the next one starts because I anticipate that we may run over a little bit. However, we do have a lot of questions, so I'm going to zoom us along a bit. So without further ado, this is a question for everybody, and it is submitted by an audience member. It is, how do you approach humor in your novels? And let's just start sort of from the left side of the table. So it'll go Ursula, Jessica, Megan, Kat, and then Diane.
I just write, and apparently I can stay serious for about the length of a short story, but otherwise my stuff inevitably turns funny. I think of a really clever observation or something and I have to put it in. People describe my horror novels as extremely funny. So I don't know how to keep it out, I suppose, would be a better answer than, it's not like I'm sitting there going, I require another joke in this portion or anything like that. It just, I think it happens organically. If you try to force humor, it tends to go badly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was gonna say it happens, and the worst thing is because I like to think of myself as a very funny person, and I know I'm a very sarcastic person, and so I will my characters reflect that, and a lot of times I have a character in a book that's basically the person that is me saying the things I would be saying in that situation. Like, these are the comebacks I would say were I faced with this. And it's not necessarily the main character. But I sometimes in my books, I'll get little notes, especially from my agent, just don't, it doesn't work here. Just turn it off, because this seems like a really inappropriate time for that joke. Or that she's like, I know you're trying to make this part as funny as the first part was, but this part is not funny, and trying to ram those jokes in is not working, because it's hard. Comedy is hard. So you just got to let it come naturally. Is this a conversation you would have with your friends? Is this actually how you would joke with each other? Or are you trying to make it sound like two kids joking or something like that? And you just have to let it work its own way through, like let it show itself rather than trying to make it be funny.
I will jump back to say that there are some scenes that I think work better if they're funny. It's the comic gravediggers and Shakespeare thing. Every time you have people make jokes in extremity. If something horrible is happening, like I am going to be standing over the piled bodies holding a Pop-Tart going, damn, and start making jokes, because what else am I going to do,
It's your defense mechanism.
Absolutely.
Gallows humor is a great thing.
Who's next?
I think Megan.
I think I'm next.
Yes.
I had to change my screen to check to be sure, but yes, I'm next. You know, I worry that what I think is funny, other people will not think
Right back.
funny. So I tried to dial it back a little bit because yes, I like to make jokes and I like things to be funny myself. So I like to put funny things in, but I always try to make it so that if people don't think it's funny, the scene still works. I don't usually have the nerve to like do a big up throughout the scene to some great punchline because I worry too much that maybe the punchline won't land. It's much better to just have little inserts of dry humor, which I like. And if other people think that those are dry humor, then they can enjoy them. And, you know, if they don't think I'm being funny, they can just read it completely straight if they want. So a lot of the funniest lines in my books, I think, rely on people's appreciation of the character and hearing that character saying that line in a voice, not just in words on the page. So if I've built the character right for Sophos halfway through the book, when he desperately wants to just stop right where they are and eat the chicken they have just purchased. But it's really not an appropriate moment to eat the chicken because they really need to get out of town because they might be followed. He wrestles with the fact that he wants to say, we eat the chicken now, because technically he has just realized he's king. He could just say this at any moment. He could say, now, I don't care if it's inappropriate, we're eating the chicken. And I didn't know if anybody was going to find this as funny as I did, but I wrote that line in where he's thinking, we eat the chicken now. And I was just delighted to get feedback from people who read the book that they also thought that it was funny when he was trying to decide whether his first exercise of his newfound authority as king would be eating the chicken.
I don't know. I've found, excuse me, over time that it's safer to let it be situational with the characters. Generally speaking, firstly, there are characters who tend to run funny. And if you put them in the same room together and turn them loose, the snark will begin. And at that point, I have nothing to do but stand back, put my hands in the air and say, just talk. I'll just transcribe now. There are some characters in particular in the Young Wizards universe. Any scene that has Carmela Rodriguez in it is going to have things happen very abruptly. Usually very busted loose things that nobody will have anticipated. Elsewhere, in the Middle Kingdoms, it can depend. Again, it's situational. The King of Ireland is now that he is king, is developing a sense of humor that may at times get him in trouble, if not with his subjects and sometimes with me. But generally speaking, I just, I let the situation drive the flow of it. If something on a second reading isn't as funny as I thought it was, kill it. You can always burn it. there is that. It's, I go by feel.
Same for you, Kat, or do you have a different approach?
Well, so when I'm talking about humor in my work, there's like all the rest of my work and space opera, and those are two entirely different things. But I've used humor in my work from the jump. The Orphan's Tales has this whole section. It was always what I read at readings about the sort of mathematical algorithm of the prince fighting the dragon and how the math on all that works out. And I've always inserted humorous scenes into dramatic stories. Probably the grimmest and the funniest at the same time book I've ever written is Deathless, which is, grim Russian fairy tale, but there's a lot of jokes about communism in it. Like that all kind of goes together. And in that arena, I agree with everybody else that it's an organic thing. It arises, it comes from character and from situation. It is a great way to sort of leaven how heavy things can get in fantasy and high fantasy. But space opera, and it's part of why it was such a difficult book for me to write, is a comedy. It is comedy then science fiction. It's inspired by and kind of based around Eurovision, Eurovision in space. You can't play that concept straight. That is not, in any sense of the word, that is not you can't just deadpan that. So I had to think about comedy in a completely different way. And, you know, Ursula said, like, insert joke here. I actually have to think about insert joke here. This section needs another joke because its primary genre is comedy. So when I'm writing that, part of why it takes a lot longer is that I can't just choose a word or craft a sentence that sounds nice or what furthers character or what moves the plot forward. There's like a fourth, fifth dimension of what's the funniest word or sentence that I could use here. What was the one? I'm working on the sequel right now. And last night I spent like 20 minutes just trying to find the funniest corporate speak word that I could slot into one. Like, it takes a lot longer. But the biggest lesson that I learned from writing space opera is the dumber I think a joke is, and the more I think it's not going to go over, the more people love it. There's a bit in space opera, and I came home from writing it and said to my husband, I either just wrote the stupidest thing I've ever committed to paper or the most brilliant, and you're going to have to tell me which one it is. And it's that the AI in this world chose a body that would be friendly to humans and remind them of a comforting and safe time in their lives and their development as a species, and one that they would implicitly trust. And they chose Clippy. And the line that gets quoted, I probably shouldn't drop a C-bomb on this panel, but it is alliterative. The line that gets quoted back at me constantly with paperclip emojis is Clippy is a alliterative profanity. I was like, I can't believe I'm going to write this. This could be incredibly stupid, and it is one of the top 3 things that are constantly referenced about that book. So, what I learned, the biggest lesson I learned writing a primarily comedic manuscript was go dumb. It's fine. People love humor that just makes them belly laugh, and it's never going to be the high-end intellectual joke that makes anybody, including me, belly laugh.
Well, we love the movie, all the Ghostbusters movies at my house, and it's the dumbest thing, but we quote it all the time, and it's so inherently funny. But when they're all in the mayor's office in the very first Ghostbuster, and what's the environmentalist guy says something, and Egon lunges at him and just yells, "Your mother!" Like, it doesn't go with anything anyone just said. But it was the best insult he could think of was to yell "your mother," and we say it all the time. Like, my husband will say to the kids, "Go get your mother," you know, just it's not like, you know, that's what she said where you're responding to anything. He just yells that as he tries to throttle this guy. And it just, because it's so out of the blue, it just cracks you up. Like, sometimes the things that you're not expecting, like an AI that looks like Clippy, like, it's what you're not no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, you know?
And it's often something visceral, like what Megan was talking about in the chicken. You know, everybody can identify with being hungry and wanting to eat the chicken now. So even you having told me that scene, like, I'll probably think about that the next time that I eat chicken or I'm really hungry. Like, that's
I can say we eat chicken.
Yeah, that sticks with people a lot. And you know, when you're arising from character, what Jessica is saying is interesting from the flip side of it, because with those private jokes, which are the funniest things ever, especially within families, you have to set those up with characters. So you set up a line that, you know, they'll reference from something their grandfather said or a poem or whatever in the beginning, and then you call it back, and each time it gets funnier and funnier. But you have to set those private jokes up, whereas they arise organically.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Kat?
Yeah.
The girl who circumnavigated fairyland. Mm-hmm. That's not comedic like space opera is.
Yeah.
But it is a particular sort of light and, I don't know, lightly sarcastic.
I think it's working all the time.
Yeah. How did you maintain that tone consistently? And did you have trouble making that work?
Well, with Fairyland, it has a lot to do with sort of wanting, from the very beginning, wanting to write a book that kind of lightly made fun of all the books I loved when I was a kid.
Right.
So, you know, there's all kinds of jokes about Peter Pan and Narnia and Alice in Wonderland and everything all the way through that. And when you kind of start, it's a pastiche, ultimately, is what it is. When you start making a pastiche, it's easy to, you know, throw in a little jab here and there. And like I said, the space opera, I would say the primary subgenre is comedy, and then science fiction, I would say that Fairyland is primarily fantasy, and its second genre is comedy. So there's a different kind of balance there. Not to get dorky for a minute, but it's the con's fault, because I was on a panel with another classicist and we got talking Latin and Greek last night. Comedy, the word comedy comes from Latin. No surprise. It comes from com edo. Edo is I eat, com is together. So we all eat together is what the word comedy literally means, because all comedies used to end in a wedding and a feast. Tragedies end in a funeral. But at the end of every comedy, we all eat together. And literally, that is actually how space opera ends. That is how almost all of my books that are meant to be comedic in any way end. They end with eating, because that's the etymology of the word. And I think that visceralness is a real core of comedy, the chicken and the eating and the private jokes of family. All of that kind of kitchen table comedy really sticks with people.
So I hate to cut this conversation short, but we have managed to spend 20 minutes on one question, as expected.
Because it was great.
Because this has been fascinating. And again, every panel in CrossingsCon is linguistics at some point. So my next question, also submitted by an audience member, is there any one thing as big as a theme or as small as a background cameo that shows up in all of your works, and is it intentional? And the example was that Jess has mentioned dragons as a lifelong thing, and Ursula has mentioned that readers see practical people as a hallmark of her work, but that she doesn't really mean it to be. So I wonder if the rest of you have something like that.
No.
Yes. Quick answer. Thank you.
That's what I can think of off the top of my head, so I'll just answer that real quick.
I'm told that other than the extremely practical thing, people have told me there's always one point, at least in my adult novels, the ones where I'm trying to write a fluffy romance, where people go, "My God, that is horrific." There's like always one sort of nightmare scene, and they're like, "What the hell is this doing in a fluffy romance?" And I'm like, "What?"
That's what KB Spangler talks about, is, you know, that point in the book. In an Ursula, you know, that point in the Ursula Vernon book. Yeah. And then 3 pages later, you realize, no, you only thought you were at that point. Now you're really at that point in the Ursula Vernon book.
Follows logically. I don't know. Yeah, that's the point where my editor says she just starts eating butter, like just getting sticks of butter and biting them.
There's usually opera routinely in mine. There's an opera either in hiding or in plain sight, sometimes both. And I think the favorite time, I stuck one into the Star Trek novel Dark Mirror, and it was a Klingon opera, and I made a note that I really had to find a great name for it. And so in the manuscript, I put in italics, X and Y. And that's exactly what the opera is known as now, because I never actually went and filled in that hole. And so we have to assume that it's some kind of very outre opera, something kind of like, Three Oranges or something like that. Very, very sort of Klingon alternate art. I'm going to stick with that story for as long as I can, because
I love the idea of Klingon outsider art. That just sends me. I mean, that's must be like pastel waste paper baskets from a hotel or something.
It's something real weird, like Dom or something like that. It's a problem.
Waiting for X and Y.
Waiting for X and Y. That's even better, actually. That's probably the stage version of it. And then they kill each other, And then it breaks out into a clan feud at the end, but it's an opera. But how could it not do that, really? I mean,
The marriage of X
audience
and Y.
sleeping to their feet and howling, you know, at the pastel waste paper baskets.
Yeah, absolutely. There will also sometimes be jokes about Switzerland, but that's just me. I didn't know at the time that I actually have Swiss heritage by adoption. At the time, I thought it was all Irish and Irish American and maybe some Scots. And now I know why the bloody source of the Rhine keeps sneaking into my work. It's very, very strange. You know, one of those things that happens when you're using Ancestry.com. And I found out that my grandmother, that I thought was Scots, was actually a descendant of a rather well-known Swiss family. I managed to track them back into sort of the 1400s in Austria, and then I lost them. But
Wow.
Anyway, Swiss jokes.
I would be stunned if I'd ever written anything that doesn't have some kind of pomegranate in it at some point. I'm a Persephone girl from way back, so I think that's probably my little religious devotion. But I'm sure, and I think I do it over and over again. I was really into the play within a play, like the play is the thing in which we'll catch the contents of the king for a while. But I think there's always a song, whether the lyrics are fully written out or not. There's always a song in everything somewhere.
And I hide the word dragon in every one of my books, even if they're not about dragons. But my first editor joked about the fact that I think my first 6 or 7 books, she called them Saving the World Through the Housewifely Arts or something, because they have to sew and embroider in the dragon slippers books. In fact, they have to learn how to, everybody has to learn how to weave collars for the dragons in the dragon slippers books. In Sun and Moon, Ice and Snow, she has to prove that she's his true bride by doing his laundry.
Oh God, one of those.
Fairy tale. There's it's from the East of the Sun fairy tale. Trolls can't make anything clean, they can only make things dirtier, so she does the laundry and his shirt turns snow white. So and there's a guy knitter, and then he spreads the knitting love to everybody else in the princesses 12 Dancing Princesses books. And so in every one of my books you got somebody that sews, knits or something, and usually that's how they save the world. Through fashionable knitwear.
I did love that in the Princess of the Midnight Ball books, but just knitting turned out to be so important.
So people send me all these pictures, though, of World War I soldiers sitting in the hospital, and if they could use their hands, they taught them to knit, and they knit socks for the other soldiers still out in the field and stuff, and it was supposed to calm your brain down, so.
Yeah, amazing.
And it does.
So my next question, let's see, I have one from... Okay, this one is more specifically for Diane. It's about, it was submitted about Nita and Kit, but I actually think that it can work for any of you, which is where your characters, and this is specifically Nita and Kit in Young Wizards, but again, for any of you, fully formed as characters in your own mind when you were writing the books, or did they develop as you write the story?
It's been a constant developmental issue. The picture I had of them when I wrote So You Want to Be a Wizard is not the picture I have of them now. And in particular in about 2 different modes, because after what's-its-face, I'll Be Home for Christmas, which was, written as if it were 2020. They're definitely not the way I was informed in no uncertain terms that Kit was working on his 2nd doctorate. I was going, wait, what? Yeah, and so I had to look into that, but it's always been about the growth of the characters between books, and sometimes when the gaps would be unusually long between novels, the growth would take me by surprise. And that's fine with me. Frankly, if they had appeared full formed as if, FAS just came up and whacked me with the axe, I think I would find that a little unnerving. And if they didn't change along the way, I would find that concerning as well, because it would kind of imply that maybe the writer hadn't changed either, and I'm not sure I would have liked the idea of that. So No, they keep changing, and that's just fine. I prefer to be taken by surprise than think I know exactly what's going on. Who else?
I'll say that I have had both things happen to me. I have had characters who I sort of worked out over time, and characters who the minute they were on, they basically walked onto the page like Athena springing from the head of Zeus, kind of fully formed. Hi, I'm here. And the big problem with those is that you take things over. So you either make them the narrator or the protagonist, or you basically have to just keep hitting them with a cattle prod. And be like, nope, this book is not your book. You need to settle down. You might get a book later, but you need to chill now.
Much the same. Most of the time when I am starting, I have a pretty good idea of what the characters are like. Sophos is sort of a very eager puppy-like person, and Ambiotes is very condescending. And Jen obviously is very snarky. But yeah, they do have to change over time. And as you put them in more and more situations, you learn more and more facts about them. You need to fill in a backstory here and there. And so you learn more about their backstory as you're writing the front story. See, I was very brief.
So brief. I cannot tell you how wonderful.
I have a tiny story, if I can be forgiven to take one extra minute.
You can have all my time, Kat.
When I was 15, this comes back into it because this never happened to me before, very recently, where a character arrived fully formed. When I was 15, Peter Beagle came to speak to my creative writing class, and it was quite a moment for me in my development as a young writer. And he said a lot of things that I remember and are very deep, but he also said that he had no business knowing Molly Grew. It's a character from The Last Unicorns, the one that gets mad at the unicorn when the unicorn turns up and says, "Where were you when I was young and innocent?" He said that she was too good for him, and he just considered himself lucky to have met her, and that he had nothing to do with her. And I was 15, so I was like, "This guy is nuts. What is?" About? He wrote every word she said, every bit of description.
He's responsible for her.
Yeah, what do you like? I don't even know what he's talking about. That's ridiculous. And I actually, through most of my career, kind of felt that way. Like we make these characters. Yes, there's a certain yes and property to it. And then actually the book that just came out of mine, The Past is Red, Tetley Abednego. Now I have to eat crow and say, I had nothing to do with her. I'm just lucky to have met her. And she really did. I had no business knowing her. She came completely fully formed. I had the sort of world and the setting and a couple of things I wanted to say, and she just fell out of my head onto the page. She's a very special person who's nothing like me at all. And I basically just hold on and go where she goes. So now I have to wear the badge of shame.
All right. Well, unless anyone has another note on that, let's move on to our next question. This one's submitted by Jezzy, and it is: how do you do research for your books that involve real world science or events? Do you visit real world sites or museums, talk to experts? And Jezzy was thinking specifically about marine biology and deep wizardry. But again, I think that this can apply to most of you. Although obviously some of you write in more alternate worlds than others.
Well, for deep wizardry, it came in two parts. A, go to the New York Public Library. B, read like crazy while you're there. Much of the data at that point that I needed for that book was not available, or anything like as available broadly as anything would be now from just going online and Googling. I spent a lot of time redrawing maps. I spent a lot of time reading the proceedings of the NOAA. It was tough. It was just reading like crazy. Same deal, for example, for The Wounded Sky. I spent nearly 6 months reading hyperdimensional physics, all of it I could get my hands on. And to say it, some of it turned my brain right around in my head, it did. In a good way, I desperately hope, to the point where one of the people whose papers I cite at the end of the book was actually started using the book as a physics text. He is a professor at Princeton. I mean, what do you do with that? But except take away from it the message that you were doing okay on the research with that one. Keep doing it that way. So I just read until my eyes cross. That's what I do.
Did you ever get invited to Princeton as a guest speaker in his physics class?
No, and it's okay. I think he's retired at this point. And right now that would be logistically challenging anyway. So if they ask me, I'll appear. I don't guarantee that anything I say is going to make any sense to them. And in particular, multiple dimensional physics has gone way past now what reading I did then. It's eternally a more interesting subject every time you come at it. Every now and then I dip in, I hit the journals, and I go, and I stagger out again, kind of clutching my head and making sure that all my body parts are still attached. It's quite extraordinary, the stuff that these guys are talking about now. I still love, though, one paper title I ran across: Taub Nut Space is an answer to practically everything. It was an actual paper. Those guys are mad. Anyway.
Well, I'm a bit of a cheater. So I pretty much managed to get a degree in college despite trying as often as possible to just take classes that I thought I could use as research later. So, I took Old Norse, and I took whole classes that were directed readings in Grimm's fairy tales and directed readings of the Icelandic sagas and things like that, and then managed to figure out that would be a comparative literature degree at the end of it all so that I could graduate. And so I took pottery, and just because I kind of had an idea of what type of books I wanted to write. And so I kept all my textbooks, and dang it, did not get my money back because I wanted to keep them as reference material. So I have textbooks still that I tab through and things like that. And I'm actively petitioning Duolingo to pick up Icelandic because so I can get back what little fluency I once had. But then, when I came up with the idea for the book that is Silver in the Blood and is set in Romania. And I'm a huge Dracula fan, and I was like, oh, this will be so cool. This will be like a little homage to Dracula. And I started to write this, and I was like, yeah, because clearly, at that time period, Romania was just full of, goats and superstitious people or something like that. And then
superstitious goats.
and superstitious goat people.
Superstitious goats are a real problem. Don't discount that.
Yeah. So then I happened to look up one little thing, and I was mostly doing research the history of the Dracula family, the actual people and stuff like that, and happened across this one line about Little Paris, and I'm like, what is that? And then I discovered that Romania in the 1890s was the hotspot of Europe, that it was a stop on the Orient Express, that it's where the people from Paris went on vacation because it was so gorgeous, that Bucharest was full of spas and grand hotels with gold chandeliers and stuff like that. And I was like, I have no concept of what this country looks like today or did then. I'm basing this entirely off of what Bram Stoker thought it was like when he wrote Dracula, and he had never been out of England. So,
time to do a little research.
What I ended up doing was I looked it up, and I'm like, did you know? I told my husband, did you know how cheap it is to take a private guided tour around Romania for 2 weeks for a fabulous vacation? And he's just like, why would we do that? And I'm like, because we do. So we ended up going, and I basically just called up this guide, and we were in the off season, so there was no one else in this. It wasn't supposed to be a private tour. They usually take, a whole group, but we were the only people interested in that entire month, which was May, which is when everything is in bloom there, for one thing, and it's gorgeous, just lilacs out your ears. And So we were the only people on this tour. So the guy's like, so what do you want to see? And I told him I was writing a book, and I told him about the locations that I wanted to see, and he took us everywhere. And we ended up staying in a hotel that had existed at the time I was writing in. And so there is a whole scene that takes place in our actual hotel room. And, and the very, very awful elevator is prominently featured in that book because it existed at the time. And so so I just went and immersed myself in, and I started writing the book because a lot of it is letters and diary entries, and I actually started writing it there so that I had like that's the most ethereal and ambient I've ever been in my life. Was I was actually sitting at tiny little desks in weird little guest houses in Romania, actually writing, dear Dacia, this is, and actually doing it. And that's the only time I've done that, because it was a story I wanted to write that was so far out of my wheelhouse, though. Like, I'm such a snob about the Vikings and everything. That's what I studied, but then Romania, I knew nothing, and I've had to admit that I knew nothing, and I just went for it. Books, documentaries, but then also went for 2 weeks and just had this guy show me everything. I've seen Dracula's toilet. I've seen,
Nice.
It's fabulous.
Most of the research I've done is usually sort of stuff you do before you even have a concept for the book, and you're reading an interesting thing and you're like, oh, there's a book in that. Mm. The first of my Paladin romance novels was entirely because I had picked up a book on the history of cosmetics, and there was a whole section on perfuming, and I was like, this is amazing. I gotta use this somewhere. In there that I really want to use, which was in some areas in, I want to say, Lebanon, in called the was it frankincense? One of the resins trees was so valuable that it was controlled by the state, and so there was a city-state nearby, basically, and prevent thievery. You would go out on a wagon with to the grove. You would harvest it, and then you would come back. And if you deviated from the track at all, they had archers who would shoot you instantly because they assumed you were smuggling. Would approach, would just have arrows trained on you, going, get out of that wagon rut, or you're dead, because that's how valuable the like, oh, wow, that's a setup. That's a heist novel, which I haven't. Usually the research inspires something. I just get there. I'm like, I got to write a book about this. Nitpicky line by line thing where, and this is, most of what it is, what I deal with, I think, is probably what's called the Tiffany problem. Kat is laughing.
I know what you're talking about. Absolutely.
If you're writing your quasi-medieval fantasy, there are elements that appear anachronistic to a modern audience. Like Tiffany was a really common name in the Middle Ages, but if you call a character Tiffany, everybody's like, what the hell? Tiffany's not a Middle Ages name. Yeah. They should be named, Agnes and Mary and stuff. It's like, okay, no, Tiffany was actually really common. You have to go through and for anachronisms. And obviously it's a fantasy world, but I still have kind of a general idea, that it's like Renaissance. So I'm going, all right, when were cigarettes invented? Okay, I can get away with that because they were in Venice in time. Okay. That one. All right. What kind of oil lamps are they going to have? Are they going to have street lamps are they going to have lamplighters with candles? And then, and it's usually 2 words in a sentence, but then you got to go chase the rabbit hole and make sure. And to a limited extent, I wish to be as accurate a writer as possible, but I'll be totally honest. It's because, and I love my readers dearly, but there is always that one guy. And this is why I don't write any books that involve firearms. are about by weight. I believe the gun enthusiasts are all that guy. So it's if you get the one detail wrong, the person who wrote their doctoral thesis on it, be your reader, and they will write you an email, and you will go, "I am shamed before my ancestors." Right? They will actually frequently do it on Twitter.
Yeah.
So you will either have to admit that you are shamed for your ancestors, or you will go, "No, wait, in Venice in 1480,
Yes.
they had, the homeless population was collecting cigar butts and making cigarillos out of them. So yes, this totally works." Okay, well, it probably wasn't 1480 because I don't know when the hell tobacco was discovered. 15, whatever. Yes. So yeah, I some and research probably consumes more of my time than just I read a really cool book about this topic and now I have to base a book around it.
Yeah.
I think
I'm gonna. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You next.
I think Ursula is right on so many points there. Like for me, it depends on the project too, because like for things like the Orphan's Tales or other sort of high fantasy things I've done, I don't have to do a lot of research because my whole life has been spent obsessing about this stuff, about folklore, about that general time in history. Like I don't actually have to do a lot of active or line by line research. But then I'll run into something like I wrote a book called The Glasstown Game, which is about the Brontes. I didn't feel like I could begin to write about the Brontes until I'd actually been to Haworth and Yorkshire and seen the moors and all of that. So that I had to actually really go on a trip. But even then, like one of the bits of research you have to do that nobody's talked about yet is kind of research your own assumptions about whatever time period or historical event you're talking about. The book is set in like 1822, I believe. And I set myself up a whole lovely train scene before going, oh my God, were trains invented? I have to check because so many of my 19th century assumptions start around 1850 and I was safe, but only literally just the Keighley train station had been built in 1821. So like these kinds of things you have to check all the time. But the other thing I learned writing that book, and particularly because it's a middle grade YA, is that though I live in fear of that guy, and I do, I had to learn that kids don't care about my research. I do not have to call it Damson Jam. They don't know what that is. I need to call it Plum. In fact, it is highly necessary to. So there's this balance between how much we all clearly love research, like how much we're all lighting up talking about the stories of how we research. And it is greatly fun. I'm a lapsed academic. Like it feels like coming home. But you have to balance how much you love your research with like what is a readable book. If you look at something like, and I do like the book, Dan Simmons' The Terror. It's a great book, but at least like 400 pages of it is like, let me show you my research.
Oh God.
I respect that. I absolutely respect that. But you do have to find
So every Jane All book, All the Earth's Children, Clan of the Cave Bear.
Yeah. It's like when my little niece at one point asked me, she was small, like 7 or 8. She said, "Who's King Arthur?" And my brain like choked on itself because I know so much. Like, how do I answer this very basic question without ruining it for this child with like everything, my lifetime obsession with Arthuriana and having to think about it. Like, and I blew it. I 100% blew it. Like, this child will never love King Arthur. But like, that's the balance as a writer you have to take, because if we didn't love the subject matter, we wouldn't make it harder for ourselves by writing any kind of historical or science-based fiction. Like, that makes it much harder. We love it. We're so excited about it, but our brains constantly want to throw all of it out so that everyone else will love it as much as we do. And we have to pace ourselves a little bit.
Can I tell them?
I frequently have to basically censor myself because if it was left to my own devices, gardener, every plant in every book I write would be named properly and described carefully. And so occasionally I'm like, nope, this guy swings the sword for a living. He is not a botanist. He does not need to stop it. There are trees. The word trees is good enough. We don't need to sit. And this is a mixed oak hickory forest. So yeah.
This is a mixed oak hickory forest.
I'm going to agree and also say thank you, Ursula, for that guy, because now that you have named that guy, one of the rare comments that I've gotten about inaccuracies in the book was the use of the word rifle.
Mm.
You know, shouldn't have said rifle. Doesn't really fit with
Rifling.
yeah, rifling hadn't happened yet. I'm like, oh, shame before my ancestors. Shame. but then there's the other guy, and what you said about damson and plum. This is me being too clever for my own good. I'm describing a moment where my main character is going to like quit the life and get married and settle down and live in the suburbs. And I deliberately used the word suburbs in The Queen of Atolia because the suburbs have been around since Horace was complaining.
Yeah.
Because they're literally below the rest of the city. There was the walled city at the top of the hill, and all the stuff around that was lower down, and it was the suburbs. And I thought someday some little sixth grader is going to say, but Mrs. Turner, you used the word suburbs, and I'm going to be able to talk about Horace and about historical things that you might think are an anachronism, but in fact are not an anachronism. And it was all in my head. And that was a book that one. Yeah, that was a book that got reviewed in the New York Times, right? Yay! Where the guy complained about the anachronistic use of the word suburbs. And there's like, it's a review in the New York Times. There is nothing you
cannot argue.
You just have to say, yeah, right, suburbs, and sneak away because. Yeah, that didn't work at all.
But someday you will meet that guy at a cocktail party with the greatest accidental quality about it. You will spill your drink on him.
No, you know what I did?
All will be put right.
I confess, I sicked a professor of linguistics from the University of Berkeley on him. So
Even better.
Could go tell him. Be ashamed
Spilled
before
your
your
academic
ancestors.
on him.
Perfect.
Well, I love the idea of sticking a linguist on somebody. I live with a linguist, and I can tell you it's very hard to get him to stop talking about it.
Use your linguists.
Use their words.
Let's see. We have a question about, this is an interesting one. What are your feelings about writing retreats or other intentional changes to your writing environment? And has the pandemic changed your process at all?
My coffee shop closed for a year, and I have a system. I get up in the morning, I put on clothes, I go to the coffee shop, I write words, and I had to not go to the coffee shop, and my productivity tanked, both for that and the fact there was a global pandemic, which did not make things easier. But now that suddenly my coffee shop is finally reopened, when they finally did, and I went back in, properly masked and everything, and saw the barista, and we ran to each other across a field of flowers while dramatic music played.
Slow motion.
Yes, and all of a sudden, like, my word count is like doubled, and as long as that lasts, I'm thrilled because, like, this is great. This is eventually it'll wear off, and that'll just be the normal place where I work. I've never gone on a writing retreat. If it was anywhere cool, I'd be too busy trying to bird watch to actually get any writing done.
Could write a bird novel.
Oh God!
Research. We were just talking about it.
The problem is that while birding is fascinating for the birder, and I, in all modesty, think I am a good enough writer to make things somewhat interesting for the reader, it's, you're basically just going to see a bird and look at it through binoculars and check a list and go, yep, I have seen the Himalayan rosy finch, hot damn. And yeah, it's yes, you could have someone go on the great epic quest to find the bird watcher in pursuit of the phoenix or the thunderbird or whatever. But I don't know, just never really gel.
Yeah, she's gonna write it. Like you hear her say it.
I was going to say, and it's going to be
We're
from the
watching that
point of
story
view of all the
develop right here
birds,
before our eyes.
Yeah.
right? It's going to be all the birds, and the bird watcher is going to be the the background character. The viewpoint will be the Himalayan rosy finch.
Like Watership Down, but with Himalayan rosy.
That's another motif. I can't stop writing about birds. And now that somebody pointed it out a couple of years ago, I'm like, oh my God, what is wrong with me? I just put a bird on it. There's all birds everywhere all the time. Just birds, birds, birds.
There's a lot of rabbits that show up in my work, and they're always creepy. Somebody pointed that out. There's at least 3 or 4, and every time the rabbit is creepy. There's
bad sign.
Bad going on.
Bad sign. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a time-honored tradition. You've seen those medieval manuscripts, the marginalia, where they've got like rabbits with like spears riding on snails, killing people.
Yeah.
That's a whole thing.
And they are violent rabbits, and they're killing
and violent snails. The snails are always
that's a contradiction. All rabbits are violent. They are extremely aggressive little bastards. Yeah. If you've ever tried to pick up a feral rabbit or a rabbit that did not want to have anything to do with you, it's like grabbing a feral cat with a worse kick. They're nasty.
Yep.
Sometimes retreats. when I can
go out and pick up feral rabbits, right?
But they can be really awesome. It definitely depends on the people who are there. But like the last one I went on was right before I got pregnant, and that was this all women fantasy writers retreat at the Fleischman Yeast Mansion in upstate New York. I was very surprised to be the only one making jokes about yeast while there, but it was amazing and really inspiring, and people I didn't know and people I was old friends with, and that's I think everyone that I have been to has been a very formative and valuable experience for me. The pandemic means that your writers' retreats will be alone.
Yeah.
You can go somewhere else and write, and that's important too. I get a lot from changes of scenery. And now that I have a small child, working in my house is pretty difficult because if he knows I'm here, it's all over. And also, I mean, for those of us who have small children, the major change in the pandemic is we had no childcare possibilities at all for months on end. And when you can't have a babysitter and you can't have a nanny, you can't have daycare, you can't have family members, and both parents work, it's just about who's not going to get to work today. And it's very, very difficult, especially if your job is the one that there's no visible consequence if today things didn't get done. Yeah. Like if the today's chain, then there's consequences, but it's hard to be the one that like consequences are invisible. So the pandemic changed a lot about my work. I did and a couple short stories and that sort of thing, but it was excruciating and grueling. And also, one of the things about writers' retreats is they're in cool places, even if it's just a yeast mansion in upstate New York, and input increases output. Like stimulation and input makes you write more. And when the pandemic sets in and the only input is your 4 walls and whatever trash isn't going to make you feel your own feelings too much on television, that affects the output in a very real way, because there will be no overheard conversations. There will be no, I saw a Himalayan goldfinch, rosefinch, and therefore, a new plot line in the book was inspired. Like all of that is gone, and you are very much paper room. It was rough.
I will add actually on the having small children thing. I myself do not, but throughout the whole writing chain, one of my editors did not get back to me on something for like 9 months, and I was like, "Does she have COVID? Is everything okay?" Well, no, she had 4 toddlers because accidental twins on the end, and she was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm in the house with 4 children under 5, and I take mornings and my husband takes evenings, but the book has. I'm sorry that I'm so far behind." I'm like, you know what? No. I don't care. I haven't gotten edits for 9 months. It's cool. You have the best excuse possible. Like, go. Yeah. that book can wait. It's fine.
Yeah. No, I don't do retreats as such. I do like to get away to write. And needless to say, the last year or two, there hasn't been a lot of that. I like to go up a mountain for 2 weeks and write. I like to go write a book in a beer hall. I like, it was really great. They bring you hot food and they bring you wine. And when people bother you, they say, "Do not bother our writer. She is writing Spider-Man." Which is charming. And that change of pace is enough for me. Once I've got the basic sort of conceptual work on a book done before the prose starts coming out, then I can go away to a place and do that. And that change of pace. There was one cafe in Bern in Switzerland, in the capital of the country. One afternoon I did 14,000 words. That remains my life record. I have no idea what the hell was in the water they were putting in my spritzers, but I want more of it. It was an extraordinary, and people would just wander around saying, "How are you doing? Do you need anything? What are you writing?" And then you get a 10-minute break to explain to them in the most broken German that anyone has ever heard, what you're at. And then they have mercy on you and they say in English that's better than yours, "That is so interesting. Will you come here and do that again?" And I miss that. I miss that desperately. There are a lot of places I would like to, take that little holiday flat behind the carpenter shop in Freiburg or wherever, be back there in that little wood paneled room up in St. Moritz where I went to buy dictionaries. I swear I was there for the dictionaries. And, just have that piece of being just you and the work, nothing else. The husband's home doing his own work, holding the fort until you get back. And that freedom, I've been missing that a lot. And dining cars. But that's another.
I find that that my work style has changed over time. Back when I was writing The Thief, I would get up in the morning every day and my husband would take the toddler and I would have a couple hours to work. And when my kids were little, I could work for 15 minutes at a time. If there was going to be a nap or something like that, I could pop up to my study and sit down and get a little work done. And the older I got, the more time I needed to work. The period of staring at the computer waiting for the words to come would get longer and longer and longer. And then the interruptions got more and more difficult to manage because if, there was a couple days where writing didn't happen, then there would be a couple of days staring at the screen before I restarted. And I didn't take retreats until maybe 2017 was the first time I went on a retreat. And it was a youth hostel. So it was not exactly a fancy place, but it was perfect for me because there was nothing distracting. But I always do better with the change of scenery. So for one reason or another, we would sometimes leave home for a year. And, there would be a fellowship or something like that. And we'd move to a whole new place for a year. And that break from reality was like a year-long retreat for me. And I miss that. And I hope we go back to that after the pandemic. Not long after I signed my agent, I was going off on a vacation and she was asking me about work that I really needed to get done. But she said, don't spoil your whole vacation working, Megan. And I had to say that is a vacation. That's what a vacation means. You go on vacation, it means you get to work uninterrupted. And so our idea of a great time is, to go to San Diego for 4 days and spend half of the time sitting in a cafe working. And for us, work is a vacation when we can do it uninterrupted, and much harder when we're locked up in four walls at home. Yeah.
I'm kind of the same. We haven't gotten to go anywhere for a year, but we do a lot of traveling, and people think, and I did have a lot of deadlines and stuff, but I really enjoyed I've written so many books on Disney cruise ships, and I love it. And I sit on my little veranda with my and watch the Alaska go by, or the Panama Canal or whatever and stuff like that. And the kids are playing and they're away from me, and I write and I love it. And I loved to write while I was on book tours and stuff. And so that's been really hard because I have a very nice office. But I do love to get out and just be writing in a hotel bed. I don't know, it just feels great. Writing in the hotel cafe and stuff like that is like, it's different, and it's fun, and you're less likely to suddenly go online and start shopping for stuff you don't actually need for some reason. If you have to hook up to someone else's Wi-Fi, it's just too much effort. So I'm more productive out of my office, I think. And so that has been really hard. And also just the mental stress of the pandemic. I've hit the wall, and then there's been another wall beyond it. And then there was one beyond that where I just was like, I can't.
Oh, it's walls all the way down.
Yep.
Yeah. I can't just pretend that the only peril right now is the fake peril I made up, because it's not. So that was really hard, and is continuing to be hard.
Well, thank you. We are officially at the end of time, but would our fabulous authors mind answering one very quick question?
If it means we don't end on a downer note, then yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I specifically saved a fun one for last. So the question is, if you could go out to coffee with any one of your characters, who would it be and why? And is it a date?
Define date.
How do you define date, Diane?
Well,
Yeah,
there are
you
several
define
strengths of date. Oh dear. Problematic.
I would love to go out with and it would not be a romantic date, but with Shardus, the King of the Dragons from my Dragon Slippers series, because he's lived a long time. He's very fascinating and very kind, and he's interested in stained glass windows and art and alchemy and poetry and all these things. And I think he would be delightful to sit and talk to.
I'll just say Dustin. Like he is a good time, and space opera is near future, so he kind of knows how all this turned out, and it's always a date with Des. So
I would. It would not be a date. I am A, happily married, and B, 99% of my male characters are so broken. I'm like, oh, honey, I know better. I love them. I would not date them. They got issues to work out, usually in the course of the book, and I am too old for that bullshit. But I would totally go to coffee with Bishop Beartongue, who is a minor character in my romance series, who is basically the kind of the very kind and ethical puppet master who runs sort of the temple that is devoted to like lawyers and civil servants, and the Church of the White Rat. And she has her finger in a lot of pies, and she controls a lot more politics than I think even I, the author, know about. And I would just, she would be a fascinating person to go to coffee with. But no dates with any of my characters. I love them, but emotionally healthy, well-adjusted people do not necessarily make for good romance novels.
What the hell? Let me just nail my colors to the mast here. My oldest character is hot. All right, is hot. That would be an interesting date. Culturally, it wouldn't be a problem for him. I might have to discuss matters with Peter, but that would. She looks thoughtfully at the ceiling. I don't call him the man upstairs for nothing. But look, you go over to middlekingdoms.com. You'll see the pictures. He is in fact hot. I've had too much fun doing his 3D art. way too much. And but himself walked in one evening and found me slaving over a piece of digital and said, "You fancy him, don't you?" And after I finished blushing myself into a decline, I said, yeah, he's hot. What can I tell you? And so yeah, I'd take him out for drinks. That would be fun.
Upping the ante from the coffee shop, I see.
No, they would go straight for the booze. And I'll just, I would have one main question for him. Are you satisfied with your boyfriend? Excuse me, husband. Are you satisfied with your husband? Because I did my best to sort them out for each other. And if that particular pairing had not worked out, I would be very disappointed. And after that, we would descend into gossip and I'd walk him home and kiss him on the cheek and get the hell out of there before I had any worse ideas. So,
I think it wouldn't be a date because I'm also happily married. But I would love to go to coffee with Kamet, the main character from Thick as Thieves, because he's exceptionally knowledgeable, speaks a lot of languages, would have many things to tell me that I didn't know about, a knowledge of his world's history and all of those sorts of things. But also I get a feeling that he would really like to trash talk, like Diane. I would like to hear the gossip. And I think that Kamet would deliver. So that would be a very, very interesting meetup over coffee. Yeah.
I like how many of us are, I would like to pick their brain about what they know about this universe I write that I do not actually know yet.
Please.
It's sort of linked to that weird magical idea that if you Google, you'll find your book. Right? Do you find that? Some days I just think maybe if I just Googled, I would find that it's somehow written itself and it's out there on the internet. And all I would need to do is download it.
I was like, no, I could Google and find my books right now. Amazon keeps trying to sell them to me, but
no, the one I haven't written yet.
Yeah.
There's a Lucia Shepard novella about that. It's one of my absolute favorite pieces of fiction called The Dog-Eared Paperback of My Life, where an author finds the great book he hasn't written yet on Amazon and orders a copy. And that is the beginning of an adventure. It has a lot of very funny convention scenes and a lot of very serious stuff in it. It really is one of my absolute favorite. Like, look it up. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you all so much for coming and being wonderful and staying a few minutes overtime also. That will conclude our Authors in Conversation panel. So next up, we have Planets in Sci-Fi here at 1:30 Eastern. And I believe Diane and Kat will both be at that panel. So for our audience members, if you want to stick around for that, I'm sure it will be amazing. And as a reminder, we will be in person next summer in August 2022 in Montreal, Canada. Registration is open at register.crossingscon.org. And you can also find those links by interacting with the little doohickeys in the gather space. The treasure chest will let you register for next year. The pile of books will let you buy a book plate signed by one of our guests of honor. I know that we did have a bunch of questions that we didn't have time for about how to get signed copies of all of your books. So this is one way that you can do that. We do have book plates for sale, which will be sent and signed and then sent back to anyone who purchases one. And the pile of coins will support us with a one-time donation. And we also have a Patreon if you'd like to support us in an ongoing way, which you can find by searching Mfozzing on Patreon. That's EMFOZZING. We also have a community Slack, and we are at CrossingsCon across all social media. So thank you all so much for coming.